Hola gente, ¿cómo se encuentran? Estamos acá en un nuevo encuentro del grupo Grite, dependiente de la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras y del Instituto del Arte del Espectáculo. En esta ocasión tenemos nuevamente dos invitados de lujo. Por un lado tenemos a Pablo Burquet y por el otro lado tenemos nada más ni nada menos que a Ramsey Campbell. Ramsey Campbell es un autor. Es una vergüenza tener que presentar a Ramsey Campbell, pero voy a hacer una presentación muy breve. Ramsey Campbell escribe desde los años 60. Su primera novela fue The Doll Who Eats Your Mother y su primer volumen de cuentos, The Inhabitants of the Lake. Desde ese momento, Ramsey Campbell no ha dejado de escribir novelas, cuentos, ha ganado todos los premios habidos y por haber, y es considerado actualmente por la crítica especializada como el mejor escritor británico vivo. Con nosotros, Ramsey Campbell.
Okay, just a little summary of the introduction of yours about your first novel, your since when you are writing, your qualifications that is amazing, the amount of prizes and everything. And of course, the most important, according to the scholars and the people with critics of literature or the genre, you are nowadays the most important writer in the UK. And I would add in the whole world, because
Thank you.
You are Ramsey Campbell, the Ramsey Campbell. Okay, go ahead. Tenés apagado el micrófono.
¿Habla hacer la primera pregunta?
Bueno. I was reading a lot about your, not your writing, because I read when I was a youngster, many of them, and is one of my sources or encourage things to delve into the genre, the writing, and into the genre, and into the Lovecraftian world.
Mm-hmm.
But I read that everybody, when you're a writer, everybody asks the same question, and we really are bored of answering this kind of question. But why horror? Why, in the middle of all the activities that you can face to making a life, you go for writing and genre?
Well, I've always loved the field, basically. I mean, from a very, very early age. I was certainly for 6 years old, I was reading adult fiction. So I got my first taste of Edgar Allan Poe, for instance, M.R. James, Arthur Machen, all the masters, because I was borrowing books from the local public library on my mother's adult tickets. And so, I got my grounding in the classics. Because in those days, we're talking obviously here about the early 1950s, the classics were mostly what you could find. There wasn't much modern horror at that stage. Those came later on. And I fell in love with it, basically. The experience of being, of uncanny dread above all, was what I looked for most in fiction. So, 6 years old, I'm reading M.R. James. 8 years old, I'm reading Lovecraft. Well, not much, because you wouldn't find much in England, but I read The Colour Out of Space when I was 8, and that profoundly impressed me and disturbed me. But I think the thing that, distinguishes the horror aficionado from other people is that, if we have this experience of being terrified or disturbed by reading it. When we've got over that a little bit, we want to have more of that. We want to go back and get some more, either, read that story again or find more of the same kind. And that I certainly did. And so when I started writing, with anything like seriousness, or even, the intention of writing stories and finishing them, when I was 11, basically, I did a book of, they were very, very, very poor, mediocre stories, but, they were just bits of other stories that I'd read that I put together. But all the same, I was trying to pay back some of the pleasure that the field had given me. And when I started to develop as a writer, I think I went into my teenagers, then that was what I wanted to develop. And basically, when I encountered Lovecraft in quantity when I was 16, when I found the very first British paperback ever of Lovecraft, because there hadn't been one until 1960. I was absolutely imbued with it. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever read, certainly the greatest horror fiction I'd ever read. So I followed that as an example. And to begin with, I tried to add to, Lovecraft's mythos in my own small way and invent creatures of my own, or, pick up references that Lovecraft had made in passing and expand them. And so that was really how I started seriously writing, and that was how I first got published.
Yeah, I'm reading, and I quote you that you said about, you mentioned Lovecraft, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I told to my colleagues that I have a skirt that is hospital facility patient, and I put the number of the Lovecraft birth, date of birth.
Yeah, oh, right. Yeah.
I kinda, yes. I'm pretty much into the Lovecraft stuff. But I quote, when you were asked about Lovecraft, you said that the kind of story that just great favorite bits for everyone, I try to put them in some of kind of borrowed structure. And you say that in those times, you find pretty much fond of Lovecraft. But nowadays, not anymore, because you migrate, if I may say, to another kind of more psychological or beyond the supernatural horror. Is that right?
No, not entirely. No, I mean, I've certainly done a fair amount of psychological horror with no supernatural element. Maybe half a dozen novels, 6 or 7 or 8, maybe. I've lost count now. But no, I still keep coming back to. I mean, what I like most of all in horror fiction is if you like, the cosmic, the kind of horror fiction that tries to aspire toward a kind of awesomeness. And I don't think anybody does that better than Lovecraft. I mean, I went through a phase really in my early 20s when I kind of turned my back on Lovecraft and followed by, what I wanted to do, which was to move away from him. But I soon came back again. And I soon, found there were merits in his work that I'd either not seen or forgotten about, whatever you want to say. I mean, for me, nobody, has a greater sense of structure than Lovecraft. That sort of accumulation of gradual detail that builds up into this huge crescendo of terror. And nobody actually selects language more carefully than Lovecraft to modulate his language more to achieve the effects that he wants. So I think there's a great deal to admire. And I still keep coming back. I mean, I did a trilogy of novels quite recently, which is what I call the Britchester mythos, because Britchester being my British equivalent of Arkham, basically. So it's my Britchester mythos, this little corner of the whole thing. And I wrote as I say, 3 novels that try and develop that across the last century into this one, and basically about the growth of a cult that starts off, hidden and very, very, secret and clandestine. And by the third novel, it's out there in the open. It's become a charity, really. It's got officers in plain sight, but it's still up to the same thing under different names, and it's still calling down, terrible things from beyond, and ultimately causes a kind of apocalypse. So, I've never really left that behind, and I still aspire to doing it, as best I can.
Yeah, you are giving a real great news for the Lonely of Providence fandom, huge fandom over here. So people pay attention. We got the old Ramsey Campbell back in business.
True, yes.
Lovecraft business. Okay. My dear friends, what would you like to ask to Mr. Ramsey Campbell?
Bueno, Pablo, en Ramsey Campbell siempre ha trabajado a lo largo de sus historias y sus novelas con el lenguaje. Es algo que le encanta trabajar. En sus últimas novelas, especialmente desde Green of the Dark o Creatures of the Pool, ese lenguaje hace que los personajes tengan muchísimos problemas en comunicarse con los otros personajes. Mi pregunta es, ¿eso es cierta intertexto, cierta relación con, por ejemplo, el teatro del absurdo, por ejemplo, Ionesco, Beckett, o es una decisión personal, un estilo personal?
All right. Let me see if I can translate this. Fernando said that communication between the characters is one of the essentials of your work, if we could say that. In your latest novels, like Creature of the Pool, as Fernando mentioned, the communication looks progressively dissolved, evanescence.
Yes.
Disrupted.
Yes, with the main character having problems communicating with the people. This disruption of the communication was, we could say, typical of the absurd theater, or the so-called absurd theater Ionesco, Beckett mentioned, my colleague. So, which is a kind of play that, or dramas that emphasize the absurdity of human existence by employing disjointing, repetitious, and meaningless dialogues as it plays goes on. So the question is there this particular unnoticeable way of writing, an intention to recover the tradition of this kind of ridiculous theater, or it is a personal stylistic choice?
I think it's personal for sure, yes. And I mean, partly from experience. I mean, from an early age, I had difficulty communicating. And I think to some extent, I'm often in my writing drawing upon my own, life and own personal experiences. And certainly, when I was a child or, a young teenager, I tend to mishear what people said. And I would be too timid to say, could you repeat that? I didn't quite get it. So I'd be left with this, probably some word that didn't exist, and it made no sense at all. And I had somehow to work with that, in terms of communicating with them. And this is increasingly, I mean, you're absolutely right. Fernando's absolutely right. This has increasingly crept into my recent fiction, and I mean even more so later than the novels that you've named. I mean, in novels like Fellstones or The Lonely Lands, two of or The Incubations, which is the most recent, just out now. The characters are constantly somehow in terms of communication, they're not quite getting it. They're at loggerheads, if you like. And I think, but I also have to say this: I love Ionesco, I love Beckett, I love that theatre of the absurd. Also, Pinter, David Mamet, they have this ear for absurdity of language and the way there's a strange sense that, yes, this is how people speak, and yet there's something surreally wrong with it. It's somehow got skewed off into a slightly odd direction. And I think increasingly this has become a sort of style of mine, and certainly a preoccupation of mine. I guess it's developed really mostly in this century, although way back, I was even very, very early books. I mean, there's The Parasite, a very early novel of mine, written in the late 70s, the end of the 1970s. And I don't know if this plays better. See, one of my problems that I give my poor translators is, these things work in English. They don't necessarily work in translation. So, I mean, there's a scene in The Parasite where there's a phone call between the central character and her father. And as I remember it, he thinks she's talking about money, and she thinks he's talking about her mother, Mummy. And this goes on for about a page, and that's probably the earliest example. So even way back then, I was doing it, but a lot more now. So possibly, I think I'll tell you what I think. Partly this is. I think my fiction has become a lot more comedy in it. That's really been a tendency over the past maybe 30 some years. So I mean, I hope people find something to laugh at in some of my stuff. I think I'm writing, to some extent, I'm writing comic fiction. So there you are.
Yeah, sometimes I read your books in Spanish or sometimes in English. And in English, I always have like a back sound in my ear, like the comedy you mentioned,
okay.
the absurd of the Monty Pythons, that they play.
Yes, yeah, yes.
Play with the words.
Yes.
And many times it's just in practical joke, but for British. Even though having me myself a British not education, but the background, is quite difficult sometimes to get. So I go to the Spanish version and say, you miss guy. This is not what he's. I fear he's trying to say, because it's a practical joke, joking with the words and how they continue the phrase with an understanding of the whole, what it is not saying.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I should just add, that one of my absolute favorite writers, and I first encountered his work when I was just about to become 17, and that's Vladimir Nabokov. And he's often extremely funny in a very dark way, but still very funny. And again, there's this joy of language, play with language that I think very much became part of what I tried to do.
Yes, much really in the same line of the very well known in the UK TV program Blackadder, where
yes,
these great actors and comedians make a very intellectual but a very funny and joyful use of the words and the mixed understanding of the words. Because the polysemic of many words that we use may sometimes confusion, or you take it for granted. So you say that, and then the other say, okay, that's what I understand, which
Yes.
is not the same, which is had been said. Okay,
Mhm.
next question.
Emiliano.
Sí, sí. Mr. Campbell, a fines de la década del 70, usted llevó a cabo una serie de novelización de películas clásicas de la Universal, por ejemplo, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolfman, Drácula's Daughter. La pregunta es si las considera como una experiencia, a estas novelas, ¿no? Como una experiencia enriquecedora o inspiradora desde el punto de vista creativo, o bien qué lugar ocupan para usted en su recorrido como escritor.
All right. Regarding your novelization of the classic Universal films, Emiliano is asking if what place they occupy for you in your writing journey. It is important. They are just another job, or it's just an occasion of joys and rejoice.
Mm. Oh, well, I mean, I love the films for a start, so it was a job in the sense that I was asked to do it by my publishers, Originally, they wanted me to do all 6 of those books, but I couldn't do 2 werewolf novels. One just had to be one. The Wolfman was the one I chose. But well, see, this is what I think. I think there's no reason why a novel based on a film and the script should be done with any less care than a film based on that script. And so, basically, I think I try to take as much care as possible. I try to keep as much of the films as possible, but find my own themes within them. And it's strange because in all 3, I discovered there was this theme of somebody trying to go home. The Frankenstein monster is trying to get back to where he was created. The Wolfman has gone back to his parental home in Wales, and he was living in America. And of course, Dracula's daughter is trying to get back to Dracula's castle. And there's also, I think, this whole thing about a relationship between the parent, the creator, if you like, in the case of The Bride of Frankenstein. So, and all of these are, themes that are also quite common to some of my stories. So all of those underlay it. I also wanted to, if I could, because I did get copies of the original shooting scripts, to put in things that were omitted from the films, if they seemed to me to be relevant. And there was one crucial thing about the Wolfman, that in the screenplay, Kurt Siodmak, who wrote it, specifies, and he puts this actually in capital letters, that the Wolfman, his change, his transformation, should only be seen through his own eyes, in reflections and in water. So it could be simply a psychological condition. Whereas, of course, the Universal Studios decided that, they wanted something more explicit than that. So we get, Lon Chaney Jr. sprouting fangs and, fur. And it was interesting to me that Kurt Siodmak, who wrote it, then went over to work with Val Lewton over at RKO, and worked on some of those films, which are very much subtler and more suggestive, and do accommodate that kind of a psychological explanation, like some film like, say, The Cat People, in the way that the Universal monster films can't be interpreted simply in those terms. But no, just to sum up, basically, I had a lot of fun writing those 3 Universal horror novels, and I think they're minor stuff, but I'm still perfectly proud of them. And I would never deny that I did them, and I'm happy for people to see them as a bit of a stage in my writing.
I would like to add that this underline that you point, that this kind of homecoming is maybe resembles or resound in your ear about your childhood and this I don't want to be a noisy Parker, but you
go ahead.
Expose your
yes
your your time at home.
Mhm,
And you say that after you gave your first draft to your publisher, you reading the writer copy, you realize that you were exposing yourself much more than you
Realized.
thought or realized
Yes.
when you were writing the book.
That's right.
So without
But
any,
good, good.
without any personal question or something like that, but I would like to put the stress in this, how the own background of the writer make, like, the Pink Floyd album, the Dark Side of the Moon, where the light, the white light enters to the pyramid, and then the rainbow colors emerge in the other side. So when something is quite resembles our infants and our fears, is the way that you go deep into yourself, and it's some kind of exorcism of ourselves, isn't it?
I think so. Yes, I think you're right.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Next question.
Sí, justamente, bueno, algo de esto estabas comentando, Pablo, recién. En relación, yo pensaba, ¿no? En relación a la pregunta anterior también. En cuanto a trabajar a partir de un material existente, hay un relato que publicó hace unos 8 años, titulado The Wrong Game, en el que el personaje principal, que resulta ser el propio Campbell, evoca una experiencia extraña que le tocó vivir con otro personaje, un tal Malson. La pregunta sería, ¿cuánto de real hay en ese proceso de escritura, en su proceso de escritura, en cuanto a utilizar elementos o situaciones vividas por el propio Campbell para crear un relato?
Yes, it's a very good question, if I may say. It's always, people want to know, always ask to the writer, how much you yourself is involved or are involved in the writing, how much you go inside your character. So Emiliano said that, for instance, in The Wrong Game, a story that was published 80 years ago, the main character, which results is yourself, Mr. Ramsey Campbell, recounts or refers to a harrowing experience of living with evil. And the question is how much of your own life, your own experience of life, infuse or influence in your writing, especially when you are crafting the whole story or the whole book.
Well, I'm not necessarily conscious of it, but I'm quite sure a lot of my experience does feed into it one way or another. And, I think we go back to what we were just talking about before, the whole business of my childhood and early adulthood and my relationship with my parents, and just, for folk who don't know, I mean, you've not asked here, but, let me talk about it a little bit. My parents were estranged when I was very young, about 3 years old. And, but they still lived in the same house as did I. And so I didn't see my father face to face for most of his life, or most of my life with him, and he was just on the other side of the door. He was the turning doorknob in the night, the footsteps coming up the stairs. And my mother was mentally ill, very mentally ill, increasingly so. And imagine that the neighbours were conspiring against her, and the radio programs were really about her in code and this kind of a thing. Very common sort of paranoid schizophrenic delusions, which again, when I was that young, I didn't have a name for it, but I knew that there was a difference between what she perceived and what was real. And I had to make that distinction from, well, as I say, really from about 3 years old. So, I grew up with this. And I think it certainly feeds into my fiction. I mean, this is because some people say, because of my childhood, that's why I write horror. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think I believe I would sort of love the field, come what may. But I do think that my childhood and family experiences, that kind of a thing, gave me themes to write about, and that preoccupations that have constantly figured in my stories. So the answer is, I mean, not particularly with a story like The Wrong Game. Well, certainly the background of it, attending science fiction conventions in Britain, that was certainly real. I used to do that a whole lot. I still go to conventions here in England and, to some extent, in other countries. But yeah, that background is thoroughly autobiographical. The incident, the supernatural element in that story is not. I hope we'll find out. But no, that was
Yes.
invented.
If I may,
Mhm.
when I read that experience you already have the grace to share with us, it was so personal for me because my mom, after the passing of my old man,
Mm.
go into Alzheimer, and this kind
Yeah.
of
Yes.
progressively
Yeah.
obliterating the whole world, or even the name of I'm the firstborn child, so for me it's
Mm.
important. Nowadays I'm the elder of the family.
Ah, yes,
but
yes, of course.
I think if in my 50s these affect me pretty
Mm.
much,
Yes,
looking at my mother swimming in the nothingness,
yes, yeah,
and sometimes pretending that the helpers were against her,
yes. Oh,
like your
yes.
mom with the radio programs and so on. I thought how much in a very, very young kid like you at the age of 3 or more
Mhm.
was influential for me, just among a father of family and
Mm.
so on. Hit me below. It was a tackle below
Uh-huh.
the knees.
Yes.
I'm a former rugby player, so
Ah,
I know
yes,
a
yes,
lot of that.
yes, yes, yes.
It was a tackle uh, below the knees.
Hmm.
In your case, being a uh, little child, it could
Mm.
be really, really a harsh
Hmm. Hmm.
time to face.
Sure.
So
But the thing is, I mean, basically, that's your childhood. That's all you know. So I mean, you think, well, this is normal. This is how it's supposed to be. And that's when you gradually look around and think, well, actually, it's not like that for other people. But I kind of accepted it because what else do you do? That's your life, and you kind of carry on with it as best you can. And I
yes,
did.
you
And here
need to
I am.
carry.
Here I am.
Yeah, yes, you have to carry on. It's life.
Hmm.
That's life.
Yep.
As Shirley Bassey's song. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, fellows, friends. Next question.
Bien, en, en la mayoría de sus cuentos, sus primeros cuentos, ha trabajado la idea de niños como víctimas. Sin embargo, en sus últimas historias, en los últimos años, si bien ese tema continúa, el número de personas mayores que son víctimas de circunstancias extrañas ha aumentado. Más allá de sus experiencias personales, que incluso ya un poco de eso habló, mi pregunta es, ¿cree en este momento que UK, Gran Bretaña, eh, está teniendo actitudes un poco desconsideradas hacia las personas mayores en este momento?
Um, Fernando asked that, he said that in your first writing, the presence of child or children was pretty much often, appeared pretty much often. But nowadays, in your writing, we can say that is much more related to senior people.
Yes.
So it's people who is suffering some kind of, they put to oblivion or some kind of these situations with seniors all around the world. But the question of Fernando is particularly with the UK, these seniors characters put in horror situations is a reflection of the nowadays situation of the senior citizens or senior subjects in the UK, or it's just a consequence as we are growing up, we are more related to people of our age. You are pretty young. You keep your baby face as usual, but I don't mean it.
Oh yes, I've got a photograph that's at the attic, which is getting old while I stay young. That's what it is. It's the Dorian Gray syndrome, basically.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Well, no, I mean, I think to some extent it's something me getting old. That's why the characters are getting old along with me, if you like. But having said that, I mean, I was writing about aging characters way back in the 70s and the 80s, just the occasional story, usually, and. But equally in the novels, you would often have an older character who was important to the story. But I think they've now moved much more to the centre stage, if you like. But also in particular stories, yes, unquestionably, they are about the way that the country is now, because I mean I know this country obviously better than I know other countries, so I tend to be writing about conditions in Britain, and because I very much believe in setting it in a recognisable environment, and the fantastic element is crucial, but the rest of it needs to be real. Needs to be realistic. I mean, not real, literally, obviously. And so that's bound to reflect conditions as they are. And yeah, I mean, I think the theme tends to develop out of the situation rather than the other way around for me. But these observations are definitely there. Yeah.
We have a very sharp colleagues over here.
Yes.
Okay, next question, boys.
Sí. Bueno, es una pregunta breve, pero que quizás la respuesta puede llegar a ser muy amplia, ¿no? Pero bueno, me interesaría saber si para usted, Mr. Campbell, la escritura de ficción es una forma de cheating o engaño, o bien es un pacto con el público al cual se deja engañar simplemente, convirtiéndose en cómplice de la fabulación.
All right. Emiliano is talking about the so-called fiction agreement, and he would like to know if the writing of fiction in your particular writing is a way of deceiving, or is some kind of agreement with your readers that are fooled, and they agree of be part of as complice as a fabulation or something like that. I don't know if I speak myself clear.
I think I mean, basically I'm trying to tell as much of the truth as possible, and I think you can do that through fiction. I think the uncanny or the fantastic, if insofar as it's in the story, because obviously not all of my stories do have that in them, but those that do, I think it's a way of sort of shining a strange light on on reality and showing it, if you like, or from a different angle, if you like. But I don't think it cheats on reality. I think it simply, attempts to give a different perspective. And so, I would hope, but I hope equally, the reader understands this is fiction. That it's a form of dialogue, if you like, with the reader. And obviously, as we know, the author is dead in a way. So, once you get the story that I've written, it's yours, and you are now interacting with it. And I have no control over how you interpret it. I actually don't want to control how you interpret it. What I'm trying to convey is the imaginative experience that I've had, and communicate that to you, but not to dictate how you respond to it. So I'd much rather you read it in your own terms and found something valid in that way, which I hope may be there.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Next question.
En una entrevista, en el libro Speaking of Horror, en una entrevista a Mr. Campbell, usted dijo que las historias que escribe funcionan como una suerte de autodescubrimiento, pero también usted esperaba que en un futuro fueran más que eso. La pregunta es, ¿sigue pensando lo mismo o ha encontrado que sus historias han evolucionado en alguna dirección específica? El texto, la entrevista, fue publicada en 1994, ¿no?
Okay, it's 40 years ago, more or less.
30 years ago.
30, yes. 30.
The past is coming back to haunt me. Go on.
Yeah. Emiliano said that in this interview that he mentioned, you said that your stories serve as a journey of self-discovery, as you already said in this interview. So he would like to know if your stories have evolved in some kind or in some specific direction, showcasing your writing growth, or you are still there diving into yourself many times without knowing you are diving into yourself, because it's of course pretty often that we writers don't know, horror writers, we don't know we are dealing with our own fears. So this is the main question of Emiliano. Is you keep in this direction, or you turn around, or you go for another way?
Oh gosh, I think it's a long and strange and devious journey, basically. And I certainly don't. I don't really try to direct it. I try to follow where it leads, wherever that may be, because I'm fundamentally an instinctive writer. And I really want to surprise myself with what I'm writing, which is why I never plot a novel. Well, certainly not for many, many years. I don't plot the novels in advance. I gather a great deal of material, and I mean, I carry notebooks like so, or use the phone as a means of setting down ideas that I'm constantly getting, particularly when I'm working on a new first draft of a novel. And I basically, I want it to guide me more than for me to guide it, if you see what I mean. I'm a great believer in allowing it to develop organically, which I don't think it can do if I try and preconceive it. So although I have ideas, obviously, of some of the elements in the novel and where it may be heading, often enough it turns out to take a different direction. And certainly that's true of my writing career as a whole. And basically, I tend to regard it as something I could look back on and maybe see a kind of progression. I mean, one thing in particular I've tried to do is to refine the writing and kind of pare it down more. So that, but in a sense, I probably look back and see, that there are themes back, 50, 60 years ago that I'm still working out. So it's still me, but it's probably most me when I don't realize that it is.
All right. Yes, indeed. Okay, lads, next question.
Usted ha escrito el prólogo de la novela Where the Nightmares End del crítico cinematográfico Robin Wood. Quería saber cómo le llegó esa novela casi perdida a sus manos, cómo le ofrecieron escribir el prólogo de esa novela.
Okay, Fernando refers to the horror novel Where Nightmare Ends
Mm.
by the film critic Robin Wood,
Hmm.
and it was kind of a lost word, a lost novel, and he would like to know how this material was offered to your hands, and how they offer or the publisher offer to write the prologue of this almost lost novel.
Well, actually, in some ways, it was the other way around. Let me explain first of all. I mean, Robin Wood, as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest of all film critics, certainly the greatest I've ever read. And I mean, I first encountered him in his book Hitchcock's Films, which is a study of Hitchcock's late films, that from published in the 1960s. And I mean, I already loved Hitchcock's work, but this book, opened my eyes in ways I could not have imagined. I mean, it made me look again at things that I'd never seen before in the work. And for me, that's one of the great functions of criticism, is to make us look again at things we've taken for granted. And actually, I would go and I'd say it's also one of the functions of art, of fiction, to do that. So anyway, I collected all of Robin Wood's work pretty well entire in published form. I actually met him just once when he was introducing Shadow of a Doubt over in Manchester here in England. And then sadly he died. And eventually I discovered that one of his novels, Trammel Up the Consequences, had been published. And I bought that, which was published in a very limited edition. And in the introduction, his friend mentioned that Wood had written a horror novel called Where the Nightmare Ends. And this, struck me as being extremely interesting, partly because it was by Wood, but of course also Wood was instrumental in getting the horror film taken seriously in the festival that he co-organized and the monograph he wrote on American horror films. So for all these reasons, I got in touch with his executor and asked if I could see a copy of this novel, Where the Nightmare Ends. And he duly sent me a photocopy of the manuscript. I then pitched it to my publishers here in England, PS Publishing, and offered to do the introduction. And that's actually how it came about. So it was my doing, to some extent at least, that the book eventually did get into print. And I'm very happy to have been, instrumental in doing so.
Oh, great! What a discovery!
Mm-hmm.
It's this kind of gift that you life sometimes or time after time try to give us. So the next question is about filming, but it's about which is your opinion about the film adaptation of your work, The Influence, by Dennis Rovira Van Bockel. What do you think? Of course, we know that a script is not a novel, and a script is always a work in progress, and you have to show much more than tell, and everything like that. But anyway, as for instance, your pal Stephen King is very reluctant to The Shining, for instance,
Mm,
version, or he's very particular, pretty much love into another kind of adaptations of his novels. In your case, what do you feel? How do you feel about watching your work on the big screen, and which is your inner feeling about what is showing that is have some similarity with your main idea or your characters, or what is in your head when you write the novel?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating for a start to see something that I've written, be represented in some form, as you say, on a big screen. And the influence, well, yeah, I mean, I think it gets the central themes, the corruption of the child and a form of supernatural possession, if you like. I mean, it does depart from the novel, but then that's films, and I've always felt, I'd much rather have a good film in its own right than a kind of a boring film that is too faithful to the original prose. And I think it is kind of a trade-off. But again, it should be his film, just as my novel is my novel. It's a product of his consciousness, his vision, and I think that's how it should be. So yeah, I'm all in favor.
Yeah, you're great. Let's put the like the Roman emperor, the fingers up.
Yes, yes.
Pablo, ¿puedo
Yes.
interrumpir un segundo? Recuperé la
Sí.
voz, disculpable con él porque me sacó Zoom. Y quisiera hacer de mi parte la última, the last question, es ¿por qué él tiene más adaptaciones al cine en España que en Gran Bretaña o Estados Unidos? Si tiene alguna idea de por qué está pasando eso.
Yes. Fernando asked you that if you know the reason, because your novels are more going to film adaptations in Spain and in where is the other place?
No,
Spain,
España, solamente España.
Spain, instead of Britain or the USA. Do you know why, or is just a business agreement or something like that? If you can share with us your opinion or your insight about that.
Well, the honest answer is I actually don't know. I mean, well, the answer presumably is these Spanish filmmakers like my stuff and want to do it. I mean, Guillermo del Toro, is a particular fan, and I mean, for his series for Netflix, he has taken one of my short stories Down There, which we hope will be one of those episodes sometime soon. And indeed, Jaume Balaguero, who made Los Sin Nombre, that is now being developed as a television series in Spain, which sounds, I'm very interested to see that. But I don't know. I mean, but more power to Spanish filmmakers, as far as I'm concerned. I'd like to see them in English as well, and maybe it'll happen. We just never know. I mean, the film business is a funny business, and there's always more options than there are completed films. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock's Lucky Jim, or Orson Welles' Heart of Darkness, or Charles Laughton's The Naked and the Dead. They never happened, but they were going to once upon a time. And who knows? Maybe something of mine will eventually show up in English. It'll be fun to see.
Great. We hope so too. I got 3 final questions.
Okay.
Just they are very, very short, but is, one of these is one of my personal questions for you, that being you or having you witnesses the genre evolution over several decades, how do you perceive the current state of horror literature compare with the time you began?
Well, I actually think we're in a new golden age. When I began to write horror, there wasn't a great deal of it being published. And, Arkham House was pretty well the only publisher to specialize in horror and to some extent fantasy and to a very small amount science fiction, but it was mainly supernatural horror. Now, there are so many good writers, or better than good writers, that I can't count them. And that's why the one question I will never answer is, name some of my favorite writers currently writing, because I always think there are going to be more that I've forgotten, I've left them out. So I'd much rather just say, check them out. There's a tremendous amount of them out there. I mean, the best horror anthologies, the best, annual best horror anthologies, they're a very good place to look and get some sense of just how much is going on, because by gum, I can't keep up with it. And I'm very heartened by how vital it is. So horror will never die. That's what I think we have to say.
Yeah, horror never dies.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes, indeed.
Well, it rises from its own grave.
Oh, yes, never. So another as a writer, horror genre writer, another personal question, if you please. What kind of guidance would you offer to the emerging writers, to the novice, to delve into the horror genre today? What would be your advice? What kind of pieces of advice?
Oh, well, I mean, basically, write about what you're afraid of. Don't attempt to be scary. Attempt to be truthful and find it within yourself rather than. Although, I mean, okay, look, I mean, I can't talk because I started out by imitating Lovecraft, but all the same, that was how I learned my craft. And then you find your theme. So, okay, it's fine to have a model at the beginning if you need to learn how to do it, but then reach within yourself for what you really want to write about. But I think that's true of any good art. So do it, guys. Write and excite us.
Good, a very good piece of advice. Be truthful. Be yourself. And the last one, everybody want to know over here, and the people that is listening to us, what Ramsey Campbell is into right now. What is writing right now? What is the subject of, if you can say something about it? What are you doing now? What is the way your writing is going on?
Yes, well, yes, there's a new novel in progress. That notebook I was flourishing at you before, here it is again. There we are. That contains lots of ideas that I'm presently working on. So I don't know, sorry, probably 3/4 of the way through the first draft of a new supernatural novel called The Ancestral, and it's basically about a family descended from, the two sides of the family descended from occultists way back in the past, and how this now converges in the present day. More than that, I don't feel at liberty. It wouldn't allow me to say on pain of some supernatural vengeance, but that's the basic setup of it.
Great.
But also, let me just say one more thing, which is it's not that I mean it's out now. But if I just say this to confound everybody, another book I'm very proud of is my study of the Three Stooges, the Hollywood comedy team. And you'll find, yes. And in this book, you will discover how they're related to Stanley Kubrick and Samuel Beckett and Shakespeare and Mozart and many other things you never thought you'd find in there. So give it a shot, guys. I hope you'll be glad.
Yes, indeed. I couldn't agree more. Yes, indeed. So we have a lot of much more questions. I could spend a week asking you like a mosquito.
Well, let's do it again sometime.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
thank you
Yeah,
very much
you
indeed.
bet. You bet.
But on behalf of the whole institute, on behalf of my here colleagues, the whole school, the whole oh well, I miss the word, the whole academic, the faculty, yes, the faculty.
Yes, yes.
The whole faculty of the institute and all the people listen to you. It was a great pleasure. It was a great honor being with you. We really appreciate your time and the generosity of your answers. And we are really delightful to meet you in person or through well, nowadays it's in person. Yes. And we would like to express on behalf of my colleagues and everybody over here that we are really honored with your presence, your knowledge, your generosity, and your wisdom to offer some piece of advice and some insight about your well appreciated work. So, Mr. Campbell, thank you very much indeed. And well, I don't know if my friends wants to say something more.
No, yo, Pablo, quiero tomar lo que ya dijiste tú. Muchísimas gracias por su generosidad, muchísimas gracias por su tiempo, sabemos lo ocupado que está, y ha sido lo que has dicho tú, un honor, a great honor.
Oh, thank you.
With great Ramsey Campbell. I can't still believe it.
Yes, I should go upstairs to my private library to show. I got a whole shelf with your books, and you are one of my favorites. So it is. I'm so sorry if I go more personal because
no.
I was talking like somebody that I grew up reading and learning. So
that's good. That's fine. No.
Emmy, your last words behind the guillotine.
No, simplemente adherir a lo que ustedes ya dijeron. Muchísimas gracias. También crecí leyendo sobre todo sus relatos cortos, así que bueno, también más que agradecido y con mucho placer.
Well, he expressed his pleasure and he agreed that he also grew up with your short tales. So you have, over here we are all professors, but you have all admirers, deep admirers of yours. So once again, before saying goodbye and thank you very much, you have honored these interviews we are guiding with the main horror characters. Your presence over here was so much appreciated. So thank you very much indeed, and keep writing because we are pretty hungry with your writing. So once again, it was a pleasure. Mr. Campbell?
My pleasure. Gentlemen, thank you for having me.
Okay. Ta-da!
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.